I'm here with Owen Strachan, and we're talking about cultural engagement. And a lot of times when I tell people about the center and they get the apologetic side, we're defending the faith. A lot of people within the church have heard stuff about apologetics. But then when I say cultural engagement, they're thinking, what in the world is that? And I know we're both kind of trying to enter into this arena of cultural engagement. So why don't you tell our viewers how you view cultural engagement?
Yeah, it's a really fun question. Basically, the classic understanding in the Christian tradition was really framed by Augustine, the major theologian of the 5th century, the church's history. So Augustine came up with this paradigm that has really caught on over the years, over the centuries, over millennia. So if you have an idea that is still being used, 1,700 years later, nice work. And basically the framework is this: city of man, city of God. So all of us who are human beings, that would include the two of us and everybody else watching this, we who are human beings live in the city of man. We're by nature, by birth, residents of the city of man. But all who become followers of Christ, all whom God saves, become residents by God's own choosing of the city of God. And so Christians find themselves, in other words, as residents of the two cities. Yeah. And so what we're doing in terms of cultural engagement is bringing the thought, the ethics, the theology of the city of God to bear on the city of man. So when we see stuff coming up in the news, when we hear about different ideas, different worldviews, what we're doing in practicing cultural engagement is saying, let's bring the thought of the Bible and of biblical theology to bear on our surroundings, on our culture. And let's do so from a winsome, Jesus-driven, no-holds-barred, intellectually perspective.
Yeah, and so one of the things that when I describe this, and that was such a great summary, one of the things that happens when I describe this sometimes is people say, yeah, but aren't we just supposed to evangelize, share the gospel? I mean, this world's going to burn up, and we're strangers, we're aliens. So why does it matter if we engage the culture? I mean, if you mean by that share the gospel, okay, yeah. But yes, this other stuff with cultural engagement that often comes up with, making the world a better place, a more just place. Why does that matter? Should we just be concerned about souls, or shouldn't we? And to that, you might respond.
That's a great question. And I think in doing cultural engagement, we are concerned about souls. So I had this really interesting Facebook engagement recently. And in it, a few of us were talking about same-sex marriage and why that's sort of become a little bit popular in a small segment of American evangelicalism, okay? And this person popped on to the Facebook conversation, as people do. It was a Facebook crash, let's just be honest, and said, guys, we could be taking this time that you guys are debating this and that and just evangelizing people, basically exactly what you're saying. So this is a real life example. It really happened. My feelings were hurt, but I'm recovering from the Facebook attack. Yeah. Anyway, the point that I tried to respond with was this. If we're going to go preach Jesus, we have to know which Jesus we're preaching. Are we preaching liberation theology Jesus? Are we preaching a Jesus who says that homosexual activity is fine, because that's being said today? Are we preaching a Jesus that Adolf Hitler and the Nazis would have been okay with? A kind of Superman Jesus that for a time might have caught on there? Whose Jesus are we preaching? Well, listen, what we're doing in cultural engagement is we're trying to strip away unbelief and falsehood, and we're trying to say, here's truth from the city of God. People have tried to misconstrue that. They misunderstood it. So here's the truth, and we're going to bring that to bear on our culture so that we can preach the gospel rightly to people in our surroundings, in the city of man. We face, in other words, pressure from the city of man to compromise the teaching of the city of God. So we've got to be careful there, and we've got to do the hard work. Yeah,
and one of the things about this is as we sit here and talk as theologians, we're thinking, you might be at home viewing this and thinking, yeah, but I'm not a theologian. But what it actually is because everyone in some sense is a theologian, of course, but what we need is people who are trained theologically to help people who are trained medically or trained in various different disciplines to think about how the truths of God actually impact those various disciplines. So no matter what maybe you're a student, you're watching this and you're thinking, oh, well, I'll leave that to them. No, this is actually a Christian thing, not simply a pastor thing or not simply a theologian thing, but this is a Christian thing where we have to think through how to engage the culture, and you're the expert in your particular field, in your particular job, and we want to come along as theologians and help you think through this.
And that's exactly right. And as you're talking, I'm just thinking, that was a nice sentence, is good. Mm-hmm. Thinking is a good in and of itself. And honestly, that just sounds really strange a lot of times in Christian circles. Mm-hmm. But this is affiliated with a major Christian university. Mm-hmm. I teach for a living, so we both have bought into the life of the mind, and people are attending a university and they're watching this from other schools. Let's just say this. Let's just be free and clear in saying this. Thinking is a good. Mm-hmm. It's a good thing to think. God is intelligence itself. Yeah. What God does, to a large degree anyway, is think true thoughts. When we are thinking well, we're just thinking after God. Jesus said to love the Lord. The first and greatest commandment is to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, and mind. Yeah. And you know, that's really speaking to loving God with our whole person. But it's so interesting, isn't it, that mind is actually mentioned by Jesus. Mm-hmm. The mind is an instrument and a tool we use to glorify God by thinking. Yeah. So let's just say that too. Even before we get to how thinking informs evangelism, discipleship, missions, etc. Thinking is good. Yeah. God's the one who came up with thinking, not Satan. Yeah. It's a big statement.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, and I know you, speaking of thinking, you've been thinking a lot about this subject, cultural engagement. Yeah. You've written a book that's coming out soon. Tell us just a little bit about that. We'll have a link so people can check it out.
Yeah.
As they're interested in this.
Yeah, so some folks out there will have heard of Chuck Colson, the apologist and public square witness is what I kind of call him in this book. The book that I've written is called The Colson Way. Mm-hmm. Comes out summer 2015. And basically it just does two things. It tells the story of Colson's life. He had this crazy story. He was working for Richard Nixon. He was Nixon's hatchet man. He said basically that he would run over his grandfather, or grandmother actually, if it would serve the cause of the Nixon White House. So he was known, he was profiled by Wall Street Journal, all these places, as being the political operative in Nixon's shop. And it was famously a corrupt shop, right? Mm-hmm. It's Watergate. It's the center of Watergate. So he's busted, goes to jail for Watergate stuff, and becomes a Christian in the midst of all of that, and then has this total turnaround where he then does prison ministry for the rest of his life, basically. He does some other stuff too, but he goes into prisons one by one, shakes people's hands, tells them the gospel, and tries to draw them into a deeper walk with Christ. So I try to tell that amazing story. It's just like a Hollywood story, right? And then I also try to use that example to call people to be courageous like Chuck Colson, to speak up for Christian truth, to love your neighbor so much that you would actually seek their good, even when they don't necessarily recognize your action as good. Yeah. And so that's the burden of the book. But yeah, it's a call to engage the culture, to think well, and then to plunge into the darkness. To not, guys like you and I, we like to think about the culture. We like to ponder ideas, right? The big ideas, good and bad, that have shaped the world. But then we want to plunge into the darkness. We want to risk our comfort and our ease and get active for the glory of God.
Yeah, very good. So we've talked in general about this idea of cultural engagement. We're about to ask Owen on the next segment, next two segments. Hope you tune in about some particular issues and you want to check those out. So stay with us.